I never thought a single conversation could destroy 28 years of carefully constructed family lies, but here we are, sitting in complete silence while my parents stare at their golden child like he just confessed to arson. My name is Sarah, and I'm about to tell you how one Thanksgiving dinner turned into the most satisfying revenge story of my entire life. But first, let me paint you a picture of the Anderson family dynamic, because without context, what happened next might seem too cruel, or maybe not cruel enough. Picture this, a pristine suburban home in Connecticut, complete with white picket fence and a perfectly manicured lawn that my father Richard spends every weekend obsessing over. Inside, my mother Margaret has spent 3 days preparing what she calls our traditional feast, though honestly, it's the same generic Thanksgiving spread you'd find at any middle-class American table. The dining room table gleams under the chandelier my parents bought during their successful phase 15 years ago, before everything started falling apart behind closed doors. Seated around this table are 4 people who've been playing the same toxic roles for decades. There's Richard, the patriarchal figure who believes his word is law simply because he brings home a paycheck, well, used to bring home a steady one. Margaret, the enabler mother who's mastered the art of selective blindness when it comes to her precious baby boy. Then there's me, the responsible daughter who learned early that love in this family is conditional and always comes with a price tag attached. And finally, there's Jake. 25 years old, 6 feet of pure entitlement wrapped in designer clothes that he somehow affords despite being perpetually between opportunities. Jake is what therapists would call the family scapegoat turned golden child, a phenomenon that happened when he learned to weaponize his charm and my parents' guilt over his childhood struggles with ADHD. See, when Jake was diagnosed at age 7, my parents went into overdrive trying to compensate for what they saw as their parenting failure. Every tantrum became a symptom to manage, every poor grade became we need to try harder as parents, and every behavioral issue became Sarah needs to be more understanding of her brother's challenges. I was 10 when this dynamic solidified, old enough to understand that I was now expected to be the easy child, the one who didn't need attention or resources because Jake required all of both. What I didn't understand then, but became crystal clear over the years, was that my parents weren't actually helping Jake, they were creating a monster. By high school, Jake had learned that his diagnosis was a golden ticket to avoiding consequences. Failed a test? ADHD made it hard to focus. Got caught cheating? The pressure was too much for his neurodivergent brain. Crashed the family car while texting and driving? Well, impulse control is a known ADHD symptom, right? Meanwhile, I was pulling straight A's, working part-time jobs, applying for scholarships, and essentially raising myself while my parents poured all their energy into managing Jake's latest crisis. When I got into Columbia with a partial scholarship, the family celebration lasted exactly 1 dinner before the conversation shifted back to Jake's struggles with community college. But here's where the story gets really interesting, and why I'm sharing this with you today. For the past 7 years, since graduating and starting my career in financial consulting, I've been the family's unofficial bank. Every month, without fail, I get a call about some emergency that requires my immediate financial intervention. Jake's rent is due and his Uber driving isn't covering it? Sarah will help. The car needs repairs and mom and dad are short this month? Sarah's got it handled. Jake wants to take a course that might, maybe, possibly help him find direction in life? Well, Sarah's bonus just came in, how convenient. The pattern was so established that I didn't even question it anymore. I just accepted that being the successful child meant being the family ATM, while Jake got to play the perpetual victim of circumstances beyond his control. Until 3 months ago, when everything changed. It started with a routine request. Dad called, using that careful tone he always employed when asking for money, explaining that Jake was having a rough patch. His latest venture, a dropshipping business that was definitely going to make him rich, had failed spectacularly. He owed money to suppliers, his credit cards were maxed out, and he was facing eviction from his trendy downtown apartment. You know how hard he tries, Sarah, Dad said, and I could practically hear him rubbing his temples. This economy is just brutal for young entrepreneurs. If you could just help us cover his rent and maybe pay down some of those credit cards, we'll pay you back when things turn around. It was the same script as always, and normally I would have just transferred the money and moved on. But something stopped me that day. Maybe it was the word entrepreneurs applied to Jake's series of get-rich-quick schemes, or maybe it was the casualness with which my father assumed I'd hand over what amounted to 3 months of my salary. Instead of immediately agreeing, I said something that apparently shocked my father into silence. "Let me think about it." That night, unable to sleep, I did something I'd never done before. I started adding up the numbers. Every loan, every emergency payment, every temporary assistance I'd provided to my family over the years. What I discovered made my blood run cold. $127,000. $127,000 of my hard-earned money had flowed into the Jake Support Fund over 7 years. That was a down payment on a house. That was my retirement fund. That was my entire financial security, and I'd just given it away, month after month, crisis after crisis. But the real revelation came when I started digging deeper into Jake's life, because something about this latest story didn't add up. If he'd been struggling so consistently, how was he posting Instagram stories from expensive restaurants? How was he affording the latest iPhone, designer sneakers, and what appeared to be a pretty active social life? A little social media investigation revealed the truth that shattered my entire worldview. Jake wasn't struggling. Jake was living better than I was, despite having no steady income. The dropshipping business hadn't failed, it had never existed. He'd taken my $15,000 investment and spent it on a month-long trip to Europe, which he documented extensively on social media while telling our parents he was attending a business development retreat. The apartment he was supposedly getting evicted from? A luxury one-bedroom in the most expensive part of town, where he'd been living comfortably for 2 years. The maxed-out credit cards? They existed, but they were maxed from purchasing crypto investments, high-end electronics, and funding a lifestyle that would make most 30-year-olds with actual careers jealous. Jake had turned manipulating our family into his full-time job, and he was remarkably good at it. As I sat in my modest apartment, eating ramen noodles to save money while my brother posted pictures of $100 steaks, something fundamental shifted inside me. The little girl who'd learned to be grateful for any attention, who'd accepted that her role was to sacrifice for family harmony, finally grew up. I spent the next 2 months gathering evidence. Bank statements, social media screenshots, rental agreements I tracked down through public records. I created a comprehensive dossier of Jake's real life versus the fiction he'd been selling our parents. But more importantly, I made a decision about how to handle Thanksgiving. See, my family has this tradition. Every year, we go around the table sharing what we're grateful for, and then Mom makes a little speech about how blessed we are to have each other. It's meant to be this heartwarming moment of connection, but it always feels more like a performance, especially when Jake inevitably talks about how grateful he is for family support during his challenging journey of self-discovery. This year, I decided, things were going to be different. So there we were, turkey carved, wine poured, everyone settling into their familiar roles. Dad made his usual comment about the meal being restaurant quality, Mom beamed with pride, and Jake helped himself to generous portions while casually mentioning his latest hardship. "You know," he said, cutting into his turkey with theatrical melancholy, "this year has been really tough for me. The business world is just so unpredictable, and sometimes I wonder if I'm cut out for entrepreneurship. Thank God for family, you know? Knowing I have people who believe in me when I don't believe in myself, it means everything." Mom reached over and squeezed his hand. "We're so proud of how you keep pushing forward, honey. Your resilience is inspiring." Dad nodded solemnly. Success isn't always linear. Some of the most successful people I know had to overcome early setbacks. And then they both looked at me expectantly, waiting for me to chime in with my usual supportive sister routine. Instead, I set down my fork and smiled. "Actually," I said, pulling out my phone, "I have something to share with everyone today. Jake, you're going to love this." The table went quiet. This wasn't part of our usual script. I opened my carefully prepared folder and started swiping through screenshots. I've been thinking a lot about gratitude lately, and I realized I should be more grateful for technology. Social media, specifically. It's amazing how it helps us stay connected with family members and really understand what's going on in their lives. Jake's face was starting to lose some color, but he maintained his confused smile. That's nice, Sarah. Technology is definitely a blessing. Isn't it? I turned my phone toward the table, showing a picture of Jake on a gondola in Venice. Like this picture from September. Jake, you look so relaxed here. This was during your business development retreat, right? The silence that followed was deafening. Mom and Dad leaned forward to look at the phone, their expressions shifting from confusion to something much more complicated. Jake started, but I wasn't finished. And this one, I swiped to another photo, from that cute little bistro in Paris. The caption says, "Living my best life, grateful for the opportunities that let me explore the world." That's beautiful, Jake. Really inspiring. My parents were staring at the phone like it contained nuclear launch codes. Dad's jaw was literally hanging open. But you know what I'm most grateful for? I continued, my voice still cheerful but with an edge that cut through the room like a knife. I'm grateful for bank records. They're so detailed these days. Really help you track where your money goes. I pulled out a printed spreadsheet from my purse, because sometimes old school is more dramatic than digital. For instance, this shows the $15,000 I sent you in August for your failing dropshipping business. Fascinating how it was spent in European hotels and restaurants rather than on inventory or suppliers. The turkey might as well have turned to ash in our mouths. Nobody was eating anymore. Jake tried to recover, laughing nervously. Sarah, I think there's been some misunderstanding. Oh, there's definitely been a misunderstanding, I agreed. For 7 years, actually. But I'm finally understanding everything now. I spread more papers on the table, transforming our Thanksgiving feast into an impromptu audit. This is every payment I've made to support Jake's various ventures and emergencies. The total comes to $127,000, in case anyone's curious. Mom gasped. Dad looked like he might throw up. But here's the really interesting part, I continued, pulling up Jake's Instagram again. This lifestyle he's been living? The apartment rent alone is $3,200 a month. The car payments, the dinners, the trips, the gadgets, his actual monthly expenses are higher than my salary. Sarah, Dad said weakly, I think we need to discuss this privately. No, I said firmly. I think we need to discuss this right here, right now, as a family. Because I have a question for Jake. I looked directly at my brother, who was now visibly sweating despite the November chill outside. Jake, in the past 7 years, how many job applications have you actually submitted? He opened his mouth, closed it, opened it again. That's not, the job market is really competitive right now. How many? I repeated. I don't keep track of. 0, I said. The answer is 0. I know because I hired a private investigator. The room exploded into chaos. Mom started crying, Dad started yelling about invasion of privacy, and Jake started spinning a desperate story about mental health struggles and the difficulty of traditional employment for people with ADHD. But I wasn't done. Not even close. You want to talk about mental health, Jake? Let's talk about the therapy I've been paying for out of pocket because I couldn't afford the co-pays after sending you rent money every month. Let's talk about the anxiety medication I need because I've been working 60-hour weeks trying to support 2 households. Let's talk about the relationships I've avoided because I was too ashamed to admit I was financially supporting my adult brother's party lifestyle. I stood up, feeling lighter than I had in years. You know what I'm most grateful for this Thanksgiving? I'm grateful that I finally understand what's been happening here. I'm grateful that I can stop pretending this is normal. And I'm grateful that I never have to enable this dysfunction again. The silence stretched until Mom finally whispered, Sarah, honey, he's your brother. No, I said, gathering my papers and putting them back in my purse. A brother is someone who supports you, who celebrates your successes, who contributes to the family instead of just taking from it. What Jake is a very expensive hobby that I can no longer afford. Jake finally found his voice, and when he did, his mask completely slipped. You're being ridiculous, he snarled. Family is supposed to help each other. Just because you're uptight about money doesn't mean. Family is supposed to help each other, I agreed. So when was the last time you helped me with anything? When was the last time you even asked how I was doing? When was the last time you contributed anything to this family besides problems that require money to solve? He couldn't answer because we all knew the truth. In 25 years of life, Jake had never once offered to help with anything that didn't directly benefit him. Here's what's going to happen, I continued, surprised by how calm I sounded. I'm going to email each of you a detailed breakdown of everything Jake owes me, including interest calculated at market rates. I'm going to expect a payment plan within 30 days. And if I don't get one, I'm going to start treating this as identity theft and fraud, because that's what it actually is. You can't be serious, Dad said. We're family. Family doesn't lie to each other for 7 years, I replied. Family doesn't manipulate each other's emotions to commit financial fraud. And family doesn't sacrifice one child's future to enable another child's delusions. I walked toward the door, then paused and turned back. Oh, and Jake? Your ADHD doesn't make you a liar or a manipulator. Plenty of people with ADHD manage to hold jobs and take responsibility for their lives. Using your diagnosis as an excuse for being a professional con artist is insulting to everyone who actually struggles with the condition. The last thing I heard as I left was Mom crying and asking Dad what they were going to tell their friends about Jake's lifestyle now that the truth was out. I drove to my apartment in complete silence, ordered Chinese takeout, and spent the evening creating a detailed financial recovery plan. For the first time in 7 years, I wasn't wondering how I was going to cover someone else's emergency. I was planning my own future. The next morning, I woke up to 17 missed calls and 43 text messages. Mom was begging me to come back and work this out as a family. Dad was oscillating between anger at my betrayal and panic about Jake's actual financial situation. Jake himself had sent a series of increasingly desperate messages that ranged from apologies to threats to promises to change. I deleted them all and blocked their numbers. Then I did something I should have done years ago. I changed my banking passwords, set up fraud alerts, and made it impossible for anyone to access my accounts but me. 3 weeks later, I received a certified letter from my parents' attorney, demanding I cease my harassment of their son and threatening legal action if I continued to defame Jake's character. I forwarded it to my own lawyer with a note asking if fraud victims typically get sued for exposing fraud. The answer, in case you're wondering, is no. But here's the part of the story that might surprise you. I didn't feel vindicated or satisfied or even particularly angry anymore. What I felt was grief. Grief for the family relationships I'd thought were real but turned out to be transactional. Grief for the version of Jake I'd believed in, who had never actually existed. Grief for my parents, who had enabled their son right into becoming someone they couldn't actually respect. Most of all, I felt grief for the 28 years I'd spent believing that love meant sacrifice, that family meant accepting abuse, and that being responsible meant being everyone else's financial safety net. The holidays came and went without me. I spent Christmas volunteering at a homeless shelter, which gave me some perspective on what actual hardship looks like. I spent New Year's Eve with coworkers who had become real friends, people who celebrated my successes instead of treating them as opportunities to ask for money. By February, I'd saved more money in 3 months than I typically saved in a year. I put a down payment on a small condo, something I'd been dreaming about since college but had never been able to afford. I started therapy with a counselor who specialized in family dysfunction and financial abuse. I began dating someone who thought my financial responsibility was attractive rather than exploitable. For the first time in my adult life, I was building something for myself instead of funding someone else's dreams. Did my family ever pay me back? No. Did they ever apologize for the years of manipulation and exploitation? Also no. Did Jake ever get a job or take responsibility for his actions? 3 guesses, and the first 2 don't count. What did happen was that my parents' marriage started falling apart once they couldn't use me as their secret financial solution to Jake's problems. Without my monthly contributions, Jake's lifestyle became unsustainable, and his true nature became impossible to hide. The last I heard, he'd moved back in with Mom and Dad, who were now arguing constantly about money, boundaries, and the consequences of their parenting choices. Sometimes I wonder if I was too harsh. If I should have tried to work things out differently, given them more chances to change, been more understanding of the complicated dynamics that created this situation. But then I look around my own place, at the life I built without their chaos, at the peace I feel when my phone rings, and I don't immediately wonder what crisis requires my money to solve, and I know I made the right choice. The truth is, some people don't want to change. They want to keep doing exactly what they've always done while expecting different results. Jake didn't want to become self-sufficient, he wanted to keep being supported while feeling good about himself. My parents didn't want to address their enabling behavior, they wanted to keep believing they were helping their struggling son instead of creating his struggles. And I don't want to keep funding their delusions. There's something liberating about accepting that you can't save people from themselves, especially when saving them requires destroying yourself. There's something powerful about realizing that the family you're born into doesn't have to define the family you choose to keep. I still love my parents and my brother, but I love them from a distance now, without financial entanglement, without constant crisis management, without sacrificing my own future for their comfort. It's a different kind of love than I grew up understanding, but it's healthier for everyone involved. The most important thing I learned from that Thanksgiving revelation is that enabling someone's dysfunction isn't kindness, it's cruelty disguised as care. By constantly rescuing Jake from the consequences of his choices, we weren't helping him grow or succeed. We were preventing him from developing the skills and character he needed to build a real life. And by accepting the role of family ATM, I wasn't being a good daughter or sister. I was being a co-conspirator in a system that hurt all of us. Some families gather around tables sharing gratitude for their blessings. Others gather around secrets, maintaining carefully constructed lies that serve no one. The difference between the two isn't about money or success or even about love. It's about honesty, accountability, and the courage to demand better from the people who claim to care about you. If my story resonates with you, if you found yourself in similar patterns of family dysfunction or financial manipulation, I want you to know that it's possible to break the cycle. It's scary and painful and lonely at first, but it's also the path to genuine relationships built on mutual respect instead of transactional need. You don't owe anyone your financial security, your mental health, or your future just because you share DNA. Family should be a source of support and encouragement, not a drain on your resources and energy. And if the people in your life can't accept those boundaries, then maybe they're not actually the family you need. I'm building a new kind of family now, one based on choice rather than obligation, on genuine care rather than conditional love, on mutual support rather than one-sided sacrifice. It's smaller than the family I was born into, but it's infinitely more real. And next Thanksgiving, when I sit around a table with people who celebrate my successes instead of treating them as opportunities, who support my dreams instead of funding their own through my sacrifice, who love me for who I am rather than what I can provide, I'll have genuine gratitude to share. Sometimes the best gift you can give your family is the truth, even when they don't want to receive it. Sometimes the most loving thing you can do is refuse to enable destructive behavior, even when everyone calls you selfish for doing it. And sometimes the bravest thing you can do is walk away from people who love what you do for them more than they love who you are. That Thanksgiving dinner was the last time I played my assigned role in the Anderson family drama. But it was the first day of the life I actually wanted to live. If you've made it to the end of this story, I'd love to hear your thoughts. Have you ever been in a similar situation with family members who took advantage of your success or generosity? How did you handle it? Did you find a way to maintain relationships while setting boundaries, or did you have to make difficult choices about who stays in your life? Share your experience in the comments below, And if this story opened your eyes to dynamics in your own family, consider subscribing for more real talk about the complicated relationships we navigate in life. Sometimes the most important conversations are the ones we're afraid to have.